It's time for another episode of the Sean Tabbett Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Jenny Papapostolou, and we're going to be discussing her brand new book, Sacred Smallness, Finding Kingdom Greatness in a Fruitful Hidden Life. Jenny, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's a blessing to be here with you.
And this is the first time you and I are meeting today. And I know you are going to be brand new to my audience. So let's have you kick this off by sharing a bit of the Jenny Papapostolou origin story. Tell us about your special abilities, your superpowers, whatever we need to know about you. Give us some context.
It's going to take some time to tell my superpowers. I'm just kidding. Actually, I feel like you have a superpower because you said my name correctly the very first try. So that was very impressive. So it really, I'm honored to meet you because I couldn't even say my name when I first met my husband. Anyway, so my name is Jenny. I grew up in America, currently living in Greece. Actually, we're relocating back to the States. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, I grew up in America, grew up in a ministry family, grew up around church and going to conferences and going to services. And that was my reality. It was a beautiful reality. I'm so thankful for it. And then, through a series of events, which I talk about in my book, the Lord led me to the mission field to care for the orphan, where my life looks nothing like I thought it was going to look like. I thought I was going to be in ministry, which I am, but in my mind, ministry was standing on a stage holding a microphone. So then I realized there's more. It's not just going to a conference, going to a church service. Actually, ministry is love and servanthood. So basically, my whole life has been a journey of the Lord just, always changing your perspective and you being so sure about one thing, and then he leads you gently into more revelation and more of who he is and his heart. And anyway, so I now live in Greece with my husband Elias and our 10-month-old baby Andreas. And anyway, that's a little bit of a nutshell. We have a children's home here in Thessaloniki, Greece, called Abba House Thessaloniki. And yeah, that's pretty much my origins and where I am now.
Well, thanks for helping us to get to know you a little bit better. Next, let's get into the story behind the book. I always say, in terms of a book coming together, there's a season where we're kind of pregnant with a message and we're carrying it and it's gestating. And then we get into a time where that message is ready to be released into the world. On the other hand, one of the challenges with writing a book is God will often put us in the position to, not only are we being vulnerable, often sharing parts of our own story and our own journey, but the people who encounter our message, they expect that we're kind of the poster boy or poster girl to live out that message. So there's that weird tension of you're releasing a lot of personal stuff. People have a lot of expectation on you now that that's how you live your life. So there's a lot of interesting challenges that go into putting a book out into the world. I just love to hear a bit of the story about this message coming together, why this was the time for this message to come to life.
Well, actually, this book took me about 6 or 7 years to write. Partly, I'm sure it was because I could have sat down and written more, but I really do believe that it was God's divine timing. When I first started the book, I had just gone into a season of helping behind the scenes. And I was sure right before I went to that place, I was sure that I was going to go and be in ministry. And when I say ministry, it was my idea of ministry, standing on a stage, holding a microphone. And so God had brought me in a season of hiddenness. And so I was like, well, I'm ready to write my book. I'm ready. This was 6 or 7 years ago. I'm ready. I know what I'm going to talk about. Oh, no. God had to bring me through many tears, many hard conversations, face to face with, man, I don't know the full message of this book yet. And so, and I wasn't thinking, oh, I need to get through this so that I can finish this book. Wasn't even a thought. I just thought, oh man, I need to finish my book. But actually God was completing things in me that definitely were unfinished that I didn't know. So, then, 6 years later, it becomes a bigger, a bigger story. It becomes I would say in that time, uh, God brought depth to it, depth to the message. Where, I mean, now I look back where I was 6 years ago, I'm like, it was this small. And now the depth that God has brought it. And I feel like you're never going to be at the place where you're like, okay, I got this. Never, but you come to a place of, okay, I'm ready to write humbly this experience and knowing that we're all growing and changing. So yeah, it took about 6 or 7 years, and now I see God's timing, because this book is all about servanthood. It's about humility. It's about basically having a heart that's content wherever the Lord would lead you. It's about going away from the importance of the big names and the big faces and the celebrity Christianity. People want authenticity, they want humility, and they want Jesus. And there's so many times that the message in a lot of the Western church and the message is anything and everything but simply Jesus. So I really believe it's the right time for it. So he knew, the Lord knew.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting season in terms of understanding and discerning what messages need to be published, because on the one hand there's what we know, and not to say that previous Christian books across all the publishers are shallow. It's just different. We definitely more leaned into things that were popular, big names on stages, people that we know, and I'm seeing a growing stack, so to speak, of harder messages that, to talk about, that maybe the normal Christian life doesn't look like being on a stage. It looks like somebody who's serving behind the scene and saying yes to that person or that task, whatever it is that God puts right in front of you. And yeah, that's definitely not as exciting as being on a stage and being famous. At the same time, to be fair, so many of the leaders that I know that we partner with, yes, they may be on a stage and they may be world renowned, yet if you get into their behind the scenes lives and you understand the things that they've had to carry and steward and the difficulties that they've walked through to get to that place that has them on that platform. A lot of time people say, I want that person's mantle. Well, it's a heavy burden that they've had to carry to get to that place. And so, that's kind of the upside downness of the kingdom. God gives you opportunities to steward and be faithful with small things before he's going to give you that big stage. And if we get on that big stage before we're ready for it and have the character to walk in that, it'll destroy us. And so it is a real blessing of cutting your teeth on the small things. I'd love to hear a bit more about how God put orphans on your heart. I mean, I think on the back of the book's cover, it talks about you wanted a mic and God gave you a broom. What did it look like for God to all of a sudden continue to put orphans on your heart and orphans in your path?
Well, as I said, I grew up in a ministry family. Our reality was conferences, sitting in chairs, and but I remember God just began to stir my heart to get my hands dirty in ministry. This is going to sound so ridiculous, but I'm just going to say it, and for the sake of honesty. I did not, okay, I'm really embarrassed, but I did not ride public transportation until I was well in my 20s, like maybe 25. And I remember the first time I did it, and I realized how much of a bubble that I lived in. And I'm realizing, like, man, I have grown up with surrounded by people that are like me, people that believe like me, people that have the same needs that I have, people. And I was really convicted. And so as I'm sitting in these services and making sure I look good, and you're in worship and you're kind of thinking like, oh, I'm going to raise my hands, but also someone might be looking at me. Um, I started, God started stirring my heart that there was more. There's more than just going to this church, going to this service. And in my book, I will always want to honor those big moves of God. Today I actually saw an Instagram post And it was God used the mega church to reach Korea, and he used the house church to reach China. We should hold these models loosely and hold Jesus closely. And I think that really summed up the heart of my book, is because I'm not saying these things are bad. They're beautiful and they're beautiful parts of the kingdom, but it's not everything. And so God just began to stir my heart. There's more. And then when I was 17, my parents went through a divorce. And out of that pain, God had led me to write a book to young people whose parents had gone through divorce, about the Father's love called Abba, Finding Comfort in the Father After Your Parents' Divorce. So as I'm writing this book and receiving healing for myself, I began to encounter the love of the Father in my life, and it wrecked me. It changed everything in my life when I encountered His love, and I began to see that He took us as orphans and He made us into a family. And I began to see our call as the church and as believers to care for the widow and the orphan. I always say, the more you know the heart of the Father, the louder you hear the cry of the orphan. It's connected. You cannot separate it. If you know the heart of the Father, you will hear the cry of the orphan. And so, but this wasn't my reality. This wasn't my surroundings. So I really believe it was divine God dropping that in my heart, because I would just, whenever I would write my book and God began to put the orphan in my heart, I would just weep over the orphan. And I was like, this is so, it feels like out of nowhere, it's not like I grew up thinking I was going to start an orphanage. I always say that's like every Christian girl's version of like, going to the moon or being an astronaut. Like, it's one of those things like, oh yeah, I'll maybe start an orphanage one day. I never really thought that it would happen. So that's how, God had put the fatherless on my heart. It was really, it had to be Him, because it wasn't something that was in my field.
Well, and that is something that seems to be universally on God's heart at all times. There are so many media ministries and large ministries that I've encountered through the years where you don't always even necessarily know that they are serving the widow and the orphan. They might have a big media ministry and a TV presence and something that's the face of a ministry, and that's what brings in the resources. But I've met so many leaders through the years where they have some shiny object that attracts people, but when you get into the behind the scenes workings of the ministry, it's all unto some greater mission, and that's what drives
Yeah.
them. That they
Well,
have
and
something
honestly,
that they're serving.
should we know everything that
Right.
everybody's doing? Doesn't the scripture say, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing? So I believe that that's very honorable,
Yeah.
and there's so many things behind the scenes. So I think it's easy to judge people that you don't know. You don't want anyone to judge you if they don't know you.
Yeah, all that to say, orphans are always on God's heart, and what I've seen with so many of those ministries that operate in that space is the resources that flow in are crazy, but because it's part of a big mission that God has those folks on. I'd love to have you press into a little bit about kind of some of those golden calves or idols that we need to avoid settling for. I think that's one of the real big tensions of this time, as we kind of see this crushing of the Christian celebrity spirit, and God's pushing us way outside of the four walls of the church in places we are comfortable before. And sometimes it's not even necessarily that those things were bad. It maybe isn't the best thing that God has for us to be about. So just that tension of, maybe not settling for those idols anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, the Israelites, when they were brought into the wilderness and Moses went up, to the mountain, and they hadn't seen him for days, and they began to get impatient. And then when they made the golden calf, they were satisfied with the golden calf. And in my book, I talk about how many people are satisfied with a substitute of the presence of God. Some of those golden calves are fame, a lust for fame, that, oh, if I'm famous, then I've made it. Or if I'm famous, then I'm okay with God. Or that becomes your pursuit more than the presence of Jesus. And I'm not saying any of this, like, I think anybody in ministry, if they say that even pride is not a temptation, then this is a temptation for most people, is to be prideful. So um and so you have to really guard your heart. I In my book I talk about outward experiences can be a golden calf. Emotional experiences can be a golden calf. Again, these things aren't bad. I think it's super cool when a church has cool lights and like fog machines. Why is that bad? It's not a bad thing. But if I need a fog machine in order to encounter the Lord, then I have made that a golden calf. If I need to feel something in order to encounter the Lord and his presence, then I have made outward and emotional experiences a golden calf. If I need to be famous in order to be satisfied in my walk with Jesus, then I have made that a golden calf. And we have sold ourselves short, because whatever we're searching and chasing, if it's not Jesus Christ, then it's a counterfeit and it's a substitute, and it will never satisfy us. And so whenever we are actually pursuing Jesus, whether we have any of these things or not, our heart is content and our heart is satisfied, because we have his presence, we have his glory, we are living with him in intimacy. And I feel like everything else, just like that song says, you can have all this world, just give me Jesus. And that's my prayer, definitely.
And one of the things you talk about in the book is that your house in Greece is next to a vineyard. I'd love to hear, what's one of the biggest things you've learned just observing the seasons of the vineyard and the day in and day out.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if the lighting was better, I would show you right now, because it's really to my right now. Every single day I drive through our gate and I just look at the season of the vineyard. I look right now, there's grapes on it. They're not ready yet, but there's grapes on it. The funny thing is, this vine keeper has no idea that he's in my book. I hope I don't get in trouble one day. But, there are every season in a vineyard is different. There's seasons where there's nothing on the branches and it's just blank and bare. But in that season, it's very interesting to me, because it was in that season that I saw the vine keeper working the most, because that's the pruning time. That's when he really cuts the branches and throws them into the fire. Like, I've literally seen that with my eyes, and it's super cool. But so that time is when the vine keeper is tending to the branches. That determines how great a fruit will be born in the harvest time. So now harvest time is about to come. Around September, October is harvest time. And, these grapes are going to be perfect and good for consumption, because the vine keeper tends to it in every single season. So I really, as I think about, the winter season where there's nothing on the branches, it brings me to, first of all, what Jesus said, for us to allow him to prune us. If we don't abide in him, then we cannot bear fruit. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Another interesting thing is the branch, the top of it is called the crown, which I think is very cool. But just as this season that has nothing on the branches, when we feel like we have nothing to offer in our life, when we feel like our life has nothing, I believe this is the perfect invitation to say to Jesus, come and prune me, because if a branch is left unpruned, then it will not bear good fruit. I call it my vine. It's like, I guess some grape seeds came to our side of the fence, and it's just this one little vine. I don't tend to it. I don't do anything. And like, literally, my little grapes, they look like raisins, because I just don't do anything. I don't tend to it like the vine keeper tends to his. And my vine is inedible, because I just don't work on it and allow it to bear fruit. So every single season in our lives, the vine keeper, Jesus, our vine keeper, has a part to play. the Father has a part to play in our life. And when we allow him to, then we can bear precious, beautiful fruit. So,
Wow. I think that's one of the best tangible, practical kind of descriptions of, why we see so much language about the vine and the vine keeper, uh, both in like books throughout kind of church history and in the Bible. Thank you so much for
it made
sharing that.
sense because I'm in Greece, somewhere, the New Testament church started and the Apostle Paul like sailed on the sea across. I'm making people jealous now. Anyway, but so it makes sense. People understand the vineyard. People back then, they understood even more than we do, unless you're a vine keeper, the process of the vineyard. So it makes sense to have this picture of the kingdom of God.
Well, I think the place I'd love to wrap is have you comment on in terms of the reader's journey with the book. They put in the time, they get to that last page. What are those one or two core takeaways you hope every single reader discovers in this book?
One prayer that has revolutionized my life, and it's a little bit of a scary prayer, is I remember being on my knees before the Lord with a heart of surrender before I moved over here, because I knew something was coming. And so I said to the Lord, I don't care what it looks like as long as I'm following you. I knew I had felt that I had come to some small place of influence before I moved to Greece, around 6 or 7 years ago. I knew I'd come to some place in America when I was living there. And I knew moving overseas was going to be like taking me back down onto the ladder, whatever this, proverbial ladder. But I said to the Lord, I don't care what it looks like as long as I'm following you. I don't care if I'm out in the open. I don't care if I'm hidden. It's not what it's about. It's about following Jesus. That would be one thing. That would be one of the main takeaways for the book. To have a content heart wherever the Lord leads us, to have a heart that is just full of peace and satisfaction because we're abiding in Jesus. The second thing, I think it's the last chapter, is everything is worship. Everything is worship. To pour our life out like that woman who had the alabaster box of perfume before Jesus, just threw it at his feet. Nothing else was more important than throwing this alabaster box at the feet of Jesus. And this was her whole life, and I believe that so many times we can feel tempted to say, every one of us have an alabaster box of our life. It's everything we've done. It's everything that we're worth. And many times I feel like for pleasing man or pleasing the people around us, we want to throw that box in front of other people's feet or trying to impress somebody. But this box of our life is only reserved for the feet of Jesus. And so we can always say yes. We can always say whatever we do in our life, whether someone is a stay-at-home mom, whether someone's a doctor, whether it's all about just worshiping him with our life, pouring our life of worship out before him. So those would be my two big takeaways from my book that I would pray that people would walk away with.
And Jenny, for the listeners and viewers who'd like to connect with you, find out more about the book, where do we discover you on the web?
You can go to lovetothenations.com. We talk about our children's home there and the other projects we're doing. And then Instagram, Jenny Olivia, TikTok. I'm on TikTok, but I don't even remember my username. So that's how active I am. But my Instagram name is Jenny Olivia, so they can follow there.
Yeah, we talked about it before we got into the interview that it's a challenge for both of us to be on TikTok. So it's a growth area that we're both pursuing. Yeah. But like we do with every episode, we'll make it easy. We'll have links in the description in the show notes to Jenny's website, links to places where you can buy her book, and we'll even link to her Instagram account, but not her TikTok account, because I don't think she's ready for all you guys to see that yet.
I think I'll be embarrassed.
It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Jenny Papapostolou. Once again, our book today was Sacred Smallness, Finding Kingdom Greatness in a Fruitful Hidden Life. And Jenny, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.